The rain had already soaked through her shoes when she realized she had exactly $8 left in the world. Not enough for rent, not enough for food tomorrow, just enough to survive one more night. She could have turned away. Most people did, especially when they saw the leather vest, the patches, the scars, and the way others crossed the street to avoid him. He was a Hell's Angel, slumped on cold concrete, bleeding, ignored, and judged before anyone even knew his name. She was a young black woman the world had taught to be cautious, to protect herself, to expect the worst. Yet in that moment, something stronger than fear spoke, louder than survival. She stepped forward, not knowing that a single act of kindness would ignite a chain of events so powerful, so unexpected, that by the next morning, an entire city would be forced to confront its deepest assumptions. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, her name was Leah Monroe, and the city had never made room for her. She had grown up learning how to be invisible when necessary and resilient when invisibility failed. Born on the south side of a divided city, she learned early that being young, black, and female meant her presence was often questioned before her character ever was. Teachers expected less. Employers watched more closely. Strangers assumed intentions that never existed. Still, she carried herself with a quiet dignity, the kind forged by years of pushing forward without applause. Aaliyah worked 2 jobs when she could find them. One at a small grocery store that paid minimum wage and offered no benefits, and another cleaning offices late at night when never shifts were available. She sent money home when she could, helped her younger brother with school supplies, and kept a small notebook where she tracked every dollar she earned and every dollar she owed. That notebook was a reason she knew she had exactly $8 left that evening. The rainstorm came without warning, the kind that turned streets into mirrors and sidewalks into rivers. Aaliyah had just finished a late shift and was walking toward the bus stop, her jacket thin, her body tired, her mind heavy with calculations about how she would stretch what little she had left. That part of the city changed after dark. Neon lights buzzed over liquor stores. Sirens echoed somewhere distant. People hurried past one another, eyes forward, shoulders tight. It was near a closed gas station that she noticed him. He was sitting on the ground, back against the brick wall, one leg stretched out awkwardly. His leather vest was soaked, his long gray beard matted with rain and something darker. Blood. A motorcycle lay on its side a few feet away, chrome reflecting streetlight like broken glass. The man was big, broad-shouldered, his arms covered in faded tattoos that told stories she couldn't read. The unmistakable patch on his vest marked him as a Hell's Angel. Aaliyah slowed her steps. She had grown up hearing stories. Everyone had. Hell's Angels were danger, violence, crime. People whispered about them with fear and fascination. For a black woman alone at night, every instinct screamed to keep moving. She could already imagine what people would say if something went wrong. They would ask why she stopped, why she got involved, why she didn't know better. She looked around. Cars passed without slowing. Pedestrians crossed the street to avoid the scene. No one stopped. No one called for help. The man's face was pale beneath the grime, his breathing shallow and uneven. Whatever had happened, it was clear he had been there for a while. Aaliyah felt the familiar weight of an unfair question settle in her chest. Why was compassion always considered a risk for people like her? She thought about her mother, who had taught her that kindness was not a weakness, even when the world tried to convince her otherwise. She thought about the times she had been ignored when she needed help most. She thought about how invisible suffering became when it didn't fit the right narrative. Her phone buzzed with a notification from her banking app, reminding her of an overdraft warning she had been avoiding all day. $8. That was it. Enough for bus fare, and maybe a cheap meal if she was careful. She could call an ambulance, but she knew how that went sometimes. She had seen how quickly situations escalated when police arrived first. She had seen how easily assumptions turned dangerous. She hesitated, weighing fear against conscience. Then the man shifted slightly, wincing, his hand pressing against his side, as if holding something together that was trying to come apart. Aaliyah made her decision. She stepped closer, keeping her distance, but close enough to see the cut above his eyebrow, the swelling in his ankle, the exhaustion etched deep into his face. The city watched without watching. As Aaliyah stayed by the injured man, time stretched in uncomfortable ways. Every passing car made her tense. Every shadow felt heavier. She was acutely aware of how she looked to anyone who might glance in their direction. A young black woman kneeling beside a white biker with a notorious patch. She knew how quickly scenes like that could be misinterpreted. She knew how stories were often written before facts ever arrived. She tried calling emergency services again, this time insisting on medical assistance only. The wait time felt endless. The man shifted occasionally, his breathing uneven, his pain evident even without words. She focused on practical things, keeping pressure on the wound, making sure he stayed conscious, shielding him from the cold pavement as best she could with her jacket. She felt anger rising beneath her fear, anger that no one else stopped, anger that compassion always seemed to fall on the shoulders of those who had the least to give, anger that the world assumed danger where there was only need. When the ambulance finally arrived, the relief was mixed with anxiety. She stepped back, hands raised slightly, body language cautious, as she always did in the presence of authority. She explained what little she could, carefully, clearly, aware of how tone and posture could change everything. The paramedics focused on the man, loading him onto a stretcher, assessing injuries. No one asked her name. No one thanked her. She stood there soaked, exhausted, watching the ambulance pull away, the red lights fading into the distance. Only then did the weight of what she had done settle fully in her chest. She checked her wallet again out of habit. Even though she already knew it was empty, she walked to the bus stop, legs heavy, heart conflicted. She wondered if she had made a mistake. She wondered how she would get through the next day. She wondered if kindness was a luxury she could no longer afford. That night, Aaliyah barely slept. Anxiety kept her awake, replaying the scene in her mind. The image of the man's injuries, the sound of rain, the feeling of cold concrete under her knees. She woke early and went to work anyway, moving through her shift in the fog, her body running on habit and necessity. Across the city, in a hospital room filled with the low hum of machines, the man she had helped began to wake. His name was Daniel Bear Kovacs. He had ridden motorcycles for over 40 years. He had survived crashes, fights, and a life that demanded loyalty above all else. But nothing in his past prepared him for the quiet realization that the person who saved him was someone the world often ignored. As he pieced together what had happened, fragments returned slowly. The slick road, the sudden loss of control, the impact, the pain, the darkness, and then, through the haze, the presence of someone unexpected. Gentle hands, care, patience, no judgment. When the nurse told him that a young woman had stayed with him until help arrived, had cleaned his wounds and called for assistance, something shifted in him. He asked questions. He wanted details. All he learned was that she was black, young, and had left before the ambulance departed. Bear was no stranger to stereotypes. He had lived inside one for most of his life. He knew what it felt like to be judged by a patch, by appearances, by reputation. But he also knew that within his world, loyalty and respect meant everything. And a debt like that was not forgotten. Word traveled fast among his brothers. In clubhouses and garages across the region, the story spread, not exaggerated, not dramatized, simply told. A young black woman with nothing to gain had stopped when no one else did. She had given her last dollars to help one of their own. She had shown courage where others showed fear. For many of them, the story unsettled something long buried. They had grown up in environments where lines were drawn early and rarely crossed, where race, identity, and loyalty were rigid concepts. Yet here was a reminder that humanity did not follow the same boundaries. Bear insisted on finding her. Hospital discharge came with instructions he barely listened to. His ankle was fractured, ribs bruised, stitches pulling at his skin. But his resolve was stronger than his pain. He retraced his route, talked to nearby businesses, showed security footage, described her as best he could. Some people shrugged. Others were suspicious. A few dismissed him outright. Then, finally, a grocery store manager recognized the description. Aaliyah Monroe. When Bear learned her name, he sat in silence for a long time. It felt important. like restoring something that had been taken too often. He made calls, not threats, not demands, requests, and those requests were answered. The next morning, Aaliyah stepped outside her apartment building with a knot in her stomach. She had borrowed bus fare from a neighbor, promising to repay it by the end of the week. Her shoulders were tense, her mind already bracing for another long day of explaining herself to a world that rarely listened. She noticed the sound first. Engines. Not one, not two, dozens. The low, thunderous rumble rolled through the street, vibrating windows, echoing off brick walls. Aaliyah froze, fear rushing through her chest. Her neighborhood was quiet most mornings. This was different. This was overwhelming. She looked up. Motorcycles filled the street as far as she could see. Chrome gleamed in the early sunlight. Leather vests moved in unison as riders dismounted. Patches she recognized from movies and headlines stood out starkly against the backdrop of her modest block. Hell's Angels. Her heart pounded. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Some stepped outside, confused and wary. Others pulled their doors shut. Aaliyah felt suddenly exposed, every stereotype she had ever lived under pressing in at once. She wondered if this was about the night before. She wondered if helping had somehow turned into danger. Then she saw him. Bear stood at the front, leaning slightly on a cane, his injury still fresh, but his presence undeniable. He removed his helmet slowly, deliberately, and looked straight at her. The street fell silent, except for the ticking of cooling engines. Bear stepped forward, each movement careful but purposeful. Behind him, nearly 100 bikers stood, not as a threat, but as witnesses, as family, as proof. Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat. He gestured toward her, and a man beside him carried forward a large envelope, followed by another wheeling something covered in a tarp. Cameras appeared from somewhere. Phones were raised. The moment stretched, heavy with anticipation. Bear spoke, his voice carrying despite the absence of shouting. He told the story as it was. No embellishment, no heroics. He described a night when he was broken and alone, when people crossed the street rather than help. He described a young black woman who had every reason to keep walking but didn't, who gave her last dollars without knowing who he was or what he represented, who chose compassion when the world had taught her to choose fear. He said that kind of courage demanded recognition. The envelope was handed to her. Inside was enough money to cover her rent for a year, enough to erase the constant fear that had lived in her chest, enough to give her room to breathe. The tarp was pulled back. Beneath it was a motorcycle, customized, pristine, with a sidecar designed not for speed or show, but for work. The days that followed were unlike anything Aaliyah had ever known. The story spread quickly, picked up by local news, then national outlets. Headlines focused on the contrast, the unexpected alliance, the shock value of Hell's Angels showing up for a young black woman. But beneath the spectacle was something deeper, something harder to digest. The truth that racism often blinded people to goodness, that assumptions robbed society of connection, that humanity was not owned by any one group. Aaliyah became a symbol, though she never asked to be. People reached out with support, with apologies, with confessions about times they had judged without knowing. Others criticized, unable to accept a story that challenged their worldview. She used the money wisely. She paid off debts. She helped her family. She started her business, just as Bear had envisioned, working hard, building something sustainable, something hers. Every success felt earned not just through effort, but through the belief that someone else had place in her when she needed it most. She never forgot the lesson of that night, that kindness was not weakness, that courage could look quiet, that even in a world shaped by racism, moments of connection could rewrite narratives. Bear recovered slowly, returning to riding when his body allowed. He and Aaliyah stayed in touch, not as symbols, but as people. Their bond confused some and inspired others. But neither of them cared much about opinions anymore. They had seen what happened when humanity came first. The neighborhood changed too. People talked more, looked at each other differently. The memory of that morning lingered like a reminder that assumptions could be shattered, that fear was learned, and that unlearning it